All right, let's get started. So, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Michael. I'm a technical sales engineer here at Nagios Enterprises. And today we're doing, I guess, what you might call a follow-up to our webinar back in March, which was agent versus agentless monitoring. In that webinar, we talked about kind of what was going on with agent and agentless options. But specifically, we touched on agentless monitoring options for Windows and what was going on with SNMP and WMI. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get to this screen here. What we're going to talk about, what's happening. This is where we'll have the quick recap of what we talked about on that March webinar regarding WMI and SNMP in Windows. And then we'll talk about what the future holds for the future of agentless monitoring within Nagios, security need to know, and then our special surprise at the end. Ooh, what could it be? Okay, so first off, what's happening? So just as a quick recap, for anyone who may not have seen our March 2022 webinar, Microsoft is making changes to DCOM. The changes are security related, and as much as I like to pick on Microsoft, these changes are just inherently a good thing, even though they make life difficult for us. DCOM is the transport mechanism for WMI queries. Previously, it was an insecure connection, and most administrators didn't have a problem with this since most monitoring takes place on a presumed secure network. WMI is not going away. It is still available in Windows, just the connection method is changing. One of the options we looked into here was modifying the existing WMIC application on the Linux side, which is the basis for the Check WMI Plus plugin. However, given the origins of that application, as well as the complexity involved in keeping it up to date versus our other initiatives, we decided that it would be best to take a different approach. Also worth noting, Check WMI Plus does still exist, and it looks like the developer of that plugin has updated everything that they need to run their plugin. So this is a plugin that you can use in Nagios Core or Nagios XI. Just do keep in mind that it is not something that we can support moving forward. If you add it to Nagios XI, it's basically a plugin that a custom plugin that you're importing and that you need to support and make sure that it does what you need to do the way that you need it to do it. So that's it for the quick recap. So how are we going to perform agentless monitoring of Windows servers in the future? We're going to do it with new Windows-specific plugins. The new Windows plugins are in their infancy right now, and they are all built in PowerShell. Right now, we've got plugins to cover a variety of metrics on Windows systems. Worth noting here that since these plugins are being executed on the Windows systems, WMI is back on the table. In fact, everything is back on the table. WMI, CIM, performance counters, you name it. If it can be grabbed with PowerShell, we can monitor it. New transport methods. The new options are WinRM and OpenSSH. So you may recall from my webinar back in March that OpenSSH was my preferred transportation method. However, I would like to issue a correction here. In that webinar, I did state that WinRM is insecure by default. I was incorrect. It is not insecure by default. It is, in fact, secure by default. In my mind, however, it is still very difficult to configure, but we'll get to that later. OpenSSH was ported to Windows by Microsoft back in 2018. One caveat here is that Windows Server 2016 does not have the ability to use OpenSSH. So for that, you will be reliant upon WinRM. Let's see here. One of the reasons I recommended OpenSSH as a transport is that you're unifying how you connect to your systems. You use OpenSSH for monitoring Windows and Linux, as well as managing Windows and Linux systems, if you're using automation like Ansible. So why worry about configuring WinRM and getting Linux systems to talk to it when you can just have Windows use OpenSSH? And now, I can already see the comments coming in. It's isn't OpenSSH just an agent then? And that's a good and valid question, and it's a question that's been thrown around in the monitoring community for a while now. Even in Linux land, people have argued that OpenSSH is just an agent. The real problem here is that no one has actually defined what constitutes agentless. So what I'd like to do is propose to you a way of defining what constitutes agentless. And for that, I would say that the connection method can be considered agentless if the connection service is built and supported by the operating system vendor. Certainly not the only point for considering a connection method to be agentless, but it's a start. The reason I went for this is that we can look at something like SNMP. SNMP is not unique to Microsoft by any stretch of the imagination. It's a service that you can add to Windows, and people have long held that it is an agentless monitoring option for Windows. And with that, I would argue that OpenSSH is now an agentless monitoring option for Windows. All right. In the previous slide, we talked about the transport method used to execute plugins on the Windows system. There's one more thing I'd like to talk about with agentless monitoring here, and this one is going to be specific to Nagios XI. A number of people have asked me during demos, can we execute custom plugins that live on the Nagios XI server so that they never have to be on the monitored system? The concern being that having a bunch of executable scripts laying around on a server that are just run on a regular basis could be abused by an attacker. Today, I'm here to tell you that the answer to that is yes, we can execute plugins against a remote host, and that plugin never needs to live on the file system of that remote host. Well, maybe in the page file or something, but that's Windows memory management. We can't change that. But this still does require a transport method because we'll need to be able to communicate with the Windows server, and currently the transport method is going to be OpenSSH. I do have hopes that we will be able to do the same with WinRM, but there are no guarantees there. Now, the question we get about this has been, well, why do we have two methods of executing the plugins? And really the reason is just choice. Nagios has always been about giving our users choice in how they monitor their systems. You get to choose what's right for your environment. The people who have asked for this new kind of feature, this new kind of way of executing plugins, they have certain security requirements that may not apply to you in your environment. So why force that on you? Yeah. Next up, the security need to know. It's time for some nitty gritty here. Okay. So starting off with the new Windows plugins. So far, these plugins have been tested with some very basic user credentials within Windows and should not require administrator privilege. Being that I started the Nagios Windows project, or Windows plugins project, excuse me, I do aim to do my best to keep it that way and explicitly call out any exceptions for any plugins that require administrator privilege. To that end, we always recommend testing, and more testing, but we'll get into that later. Also, since the plugins are built in PowerShell, for those who are in secure environments, you might consider using signing, PowerShell signing. Uh, the idea is you look at the plugins, you go through a little code review, whatever kind of verification process you have for those PowerShell scripts, those plugins, and then you sign those scripts with your code signing key and say, okay, this is good. We will allow this to run on our server, and that kind of gives you that additional layer of security. Now, WinRM security options explained. This one can get a little gnarly, so I'm going to try and keep it kind of high level here. So first and foremost, you can get the current WinRM service configuration with the command shown here. It's WinRM get WinRM config service command, PowerShell command. Or actually, I think that's not actually a commandlet. That you might even be able to do that in CMD if you really want to. But this is kind of part of that output. Do note that the options shown here are from my own server 2019 setup, where I am trying various combinations of security and authentication and whatnot. These are neither default nor recommended settings. So the first option is actually this going to be this allow unencrypted. Right now I have this set to true. Excuse me, I'm tripping over my own tongue already. So WinRM at its heart is just a SOAP API. So allow unencrypted true means that you will allow HTTP or HTTPS connections. If it's false, you will only allow HTTPS connections. Now down here under the auth section, wow. Basic, this is kind of like basic auth on a web server. It will only authenticate against local user accounts, so no domain accounts. Also, your credentials are protected only by base 64 encoding, which is to say not at all. So if you use this option, make sure you have allow unencrypted set to false. Otherwise, you're one very, very small step away from sending your credentials in plain text. Kerberos. Kerberos authentication has been around for a very long time, but as far as I can tell, most people still think of it as black magic. It's actually very similar to NTLM v2 in that it's kind of a token-based auth model. I suppose that should probably be more like NTLM. I think NTLM v2 is actually a protocol. Yeah, anyways. It's a token-based auth method. Kerberos cannot use local accounts, but can use Active Directory accounts. Negotiate. So you might think that negotiate means both sides of the connections will talk and figure out which of these authentication connection types they can use. To which all I can say is, oh, you sweet summer child. Why would something so simple have such a direct and straightforward definition? So negotiate authentication is actually Microsoft's implementation of GSS API, and their implementation is called SPENGO, or SPENGO, as I like to call it. Those are two very long acronyms that I could talk about for hours, but we don't have hours. So let me just say SPENGO does some negotiating back and forth between the two sides of a connection, but the authentication options are not the ones listed here. The options that it will choose between are going to be either Kerberos or NTLM, with Kerberos being the preferred method, because NTLM is trash, and Microsoft needs to stop using it already. Seriously, it's been like 30 years, man. She's gone. Just let her go. Certificate. Certificate authentication is often confused with whether the connection uses HTTP or HTTPS. That's not what this option is about. We are talking about the X509 certificates. But if you have a certificate based authentication, what you have are certificates that are associated with a specific user. So if I recall correctly, this is what smart card authentication is based off of, but don't quote me on that. I suppose you can quote me on that because this is a webinar. I'll issue a correction later on if I'm wrong, whatever. I just work here. CRED SSP. CRED SSP is a newer authentication model that can do some pretty advanced stuff. Basically, you can send credentials to one system via this CRED SSP. I don't know if it's a protocol or what, but that system that you send the credentials to will then attempt to validate those credentials against another service. That service could be another domain that remote server has access to, or it could be a SQL Server database, a table of usernames and passwords and so on, or even local computer accounts on a non-domain joined system. Could be just about anything. And then finally, we have this CBT hardening level. And this one took a little bit of digging, but it looks like this is about requiring another token for your systems to access WinRM. My guess is that people who need this option already know what it is. It seems to be a lot like the optional TLS key in OpenVPN servers. But that's a lot. That's a lot for the WinRM security side of things. So you can kind of see where I'm thinking this is kind of involved for setup. Let's move on to OpenSSH. And really, the big thing that I want to talk about, for OpenSSH is going to be key-based authentication. So for those who are not in the know, OpenSSH has the ability to use key-based authentication. In short, you generate a key pair. One key is private, the other key is public. You place the public key on systems that you want to SSH into, and then you typically don't need to worry about maintaining passwords across all those systems. You just log in with your private key. This has been a double-edged sword in the past. People would generate their keys and not password protect those keys. Then they would revel in their ability to SSH into any of the systems under their control without having to enter a password. Today, we would either call that a backdoor or a resume-generating event waiting to happen. But passwordless SSH keys do allow us to automate tasks, so they're still useful. You just need to be aware of your user permissions. If you have a passwordless SSH key, it's a tongue twister, associated with a user who has very specific access to run just a handful of applications, then the threat is limited. And I recommend, and what I recommend you do here, which brings me back to the top of the previous slide, the plugins have been built to only require very basic access to the system. So make sure that you're taking advantage of that. Any service accounts that you have running these PowerShell plugins, don't give them any more access than they need. It's just a really easy way to keep things secure. On a side note, I do want to call out for those who are in the know, do not use SSH copy ID to copy your public key from a Linux system to a Windows system. I've done this. It has resulted in an authorized keys file that was created in some very strange format. And I had to bang my head against the problem for quite some time before I discovered what it was and then changed that file back to UTF-8. All right, let's get to the surprise. So we are announcing our closed beta program to get user feedback on these new agentless methods. The beta will be open only to a limited number of our paid customers. This part of the webinar is being used to kind of gauge the interest in a beta program. So, give us a shout out if you're interested. We'll be sending out a link to a sign up site sometime after this webinar. And I just kind of want to call out the the picture here. This is a Simpsons episode where the character Snake Jailbird steals a VCR from the Simpsons family, only to find out that it doesn't play VHSs, but rather beta tapes. It's an older reference, but it still checks out. And that's the end of the webinar. Or is it? No, really, it's the end of the webinar, but not the end of this discussion on our agentless methods. That's only getting started. So we would like to mention that next month we will not be having a webinar, so we will see you back here in January of 2023. Happy holidays and Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you all for coming and hanging out with us in this webinar.